Okay, welcome to this interview for the Society of Sports Therapists. I'm Christian Weaver, and today I'm joined by current director Michael Cole. So, Michael, would you mind just giving us a little introduction and background to yourself?
Hi, thanks, Christian. Yeah, good to be here. So my name's Michael Cole. I've been a graduate sports therapist for 22 years and just over a year ago joined the board of directors for the society.
And so, you obviously thought that the society was something that was close to your heart, and you've become a director. But sort of growing up, were you involved in different sports?
Yeah, so I was really passionate about sport in general, particularly football and running, climbing, tennis, racket sports, that sort of stuff. And I always went to get involved in sport, but wasn't quite good enough to kind of make a career out of it. And I thought the next best thing was to try and work with sports teams. Always loved learning about the body, anatomy, physiology. So I did PEA level, English and business studies as well. And then I went straight from sixth form college into university, which was then the University of North London, to do the sports therapy degree. It was one of the first ones, and absolutely enjoyed it. Benefited from learning under Professor Graham Smith, Ian Little, John, Steve Smelt. It gave me a great foundation to go on to have a career, a pretty varied career really in sports therapy. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've obviously had that varied career. I probably know because I know you outside the podcast. But would you mind just describing sort of the things that you've gone on to do within that sort of 20-year career that you've had? Obviously, you've had things like TV and film, work with elite sports and in education. So, can you just tell us about that sort of career and how that's developed and how it all happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I kind of opened up my own sports injury clinic a couple of months after graduating, age 21, and that was a pretty terrifying experience, but fantastic as well. And I still run that part-time clinic now, and it started in sort of like a David Lloyd leisure centre, and then for about 10 years, and then moved into my own premises after that. Side by side with that, I always had a real passion for kind of teaching and education. So again, I think I was 22, and I took a part-time job teaching anatomy and physiology and sports massage to adult learners at a college in Essex. Did that for a few years and really enjoyed it, and did some postgraduate education qualifications, and ended up doing some part-time lecturing on NVQs in soft tissue therapy and BTEC sports injuries units, that type of stuff. And then in about 2010, I was asked to design and write a sports therapy degree for the University of East London, which I did, and slowly kind of upped my hours as a lecturer and course leader at the University of East London, and I'm still there now. Really enjoy that, and combining it with some PhD research. But yeah, you mentioned that the TV and kind of film stuff, that also was a strange thing. I was working in sport at QPR for their Queen's Park Rangers Football Club in their academy, and one day somebody came in and said they were filming on a new show on Sky, and have they got a therapist who could go down and advise them on how to pronounce words, latissimus dorsi or whatever it might have been. And it's just so happened that I think it was Prav Mathma and Bobby Bakich were the physios who I was working with, and they were way too busy to do it. So I put my hand up, and next thing I know, I'm on set doing kind of advising the acting therapists on how to say words. And then I started advising on kind of what exercises would they be doing and what rehab and treatments. And that went on for a couple of seasons. And at one stage, they asked me to step in front of the camera, which was pretty daunting, and play the sports therapist as well as consult on it. So that was good. And weirdly, that led to a couple of other things, working with an ex-pro called Andy Answer, who has a massive, worldwide consultancy called Sports on Screen, does all the kind of like Nike adverts and football shows, and ended up working on adverts with the likes of Cristiano Ronaldo and Carlos Tevez and Ruud van Nistelrooy, and it was absolutely a bit of a fantasy, really, being on the pitch with those sorts of players. But so yeah, that was a very varied sort of career I've had up until now.
And you mentioned right at the start you set up your own sports therapy clinic. How did you find that? Was that a difficult process? Or did you feel as though you knew what you wanted to do in terms of setting up that clinic initially?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to work for myself, but it was incredibly daunting. But I do recall the society and people like Professor Smith being very supportive. I recall a couple of my best friends on the course staying in real close contact with them on the telephone, just for a bit of support. You've got a really difficult patient, and you want to kind of bounce some ideas off somebody you can trust without feeling like you don't know what you're doing. And that was a really important part of it. But I do remember having to go to the Citizens Advice Bureau and talk about tax and accounting and all that sort of stuff, and all that sort of governance side of it was a lot to take in, but it was really enjoyable sort of being able to plan your own time and take on those patients.
Great, and it sort of ties me into the next question, which is what sort of skills have you developed, or what skills have helped you in your career as a sports therapist, and maybe tied into your position now as a director of the Society of Sports Therapists?
I'd say first and foremost, developing an ability to be a people person, because when I first started out, I was a bit, I would say, introverted, and wasn't really fantastic at kind of walking around the gym floor and selling the business, or really being a vibrant person when first introduced at like a new football club. I was at, as I mentioned, Queen's Park Rangers, but Dagenham and Redbridge, Billericay Town, Cambridge City FC. And I always remember, they're quite boisterous kind of cultures and environments, and that wasn't really my setting. So I had to very quickly learn how to put that sort of game face on and be comfortable addressing groups of people, taking warm-ups in training. But then back in the clinic side of things, I remember a couple of times a knock on the door when I was in the David Lloyd Centre, and a patient would put their head around the door and ask if the supervisor was there, because I looked really, really young when I first started out. So being able to develop that ability to communicate, understand the patient, and kind of present yourself in a way that gives somebody else confidence, I think that was a really, really big thing. And then just that ability to stay organized, staying up to date with research as a graduate sports therapist or any practitioner is really, really tough. There's not enough hours in the day. So the ability to set aside some time for that sort of organic CPD and stay informed, manage all your notes, so organizationally, I think planning was a big thing. Those are probably the two biggest ones, I would say. And then just one more, Christian, I think that ability to take on a challenge which you may not feel 100% ready for, because I don't think anybody feels really 100% ready for something. And coming up to being a director of the board, after sort of 20 years in industry, I thought now might be the time where I can share some of that experience and help contribute to pushing the society forwards. But that was a leap for me, and certainly years before I wouldn't have thought I was ready for it.
Yeah, I'd love to know, you mentioned at the start there being maybe a more introverted personality. How did you deal with those kind of environments where you were going into maybe a group of athletes where you had to be the leader, or you had to be able to be confident or demonstrate confidence? How did you deal with that?
Do you know what? One of the main things I did was I thought back to when I was at school and in college and playing Sunday league football, when I was captain of the football teams, and being captain sort of brought me out of myself in terms of organising others and bringing people together, and I kind of just imagined it was that sort of scenario. And I think from an interpersonal perspective, maybe I would, volunteer an opinion, speak a bit more authoritatively on something, raise the voice when needed, be sort of, judge when to sort of come across a bit more strict and kind of didactic, because that's sometimes necessary when you're doing your rehab and your training and stuff. But at other times, sort of stepping back and listening a bit more and having a bit of fun, really. I think that navigating the banter was certainly something that I would say didn't come easy to me to start with. So yeah, I think the big thing was thinking, I've been a captain in sports before. Let's apply some of those sort of attributes to it. It seemed to work out all right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. We have to, as sports therapists, be able to sort of know when to be authoritative in what we say, and then also be able to take our foot off the gas a little bit and maybe have that interpersonal skills where we can actually have a laugh and a joke about something with somebody in order to just continue that motivation and continue to work in a collaborative kind of approach with the patient as well. So some interesting points there. Thank you very much. And also just thinking about on the opposite side then, what are the really difficult aspects of being a sports therapist?
I think what was probably difficult for me was the decision of whether or not to continue in post-grad research and qualifications, because sports therapy, is traditionally really vocational discipline. There still aren't a huge number of graduate sports therapists with PhDs. I know you're in that group now, which is fantastic. And it was always a bit of a decision for me. Do I try and keep working through my career in clinical practice and sport and earning money, or do I sort of divert into research to try and get a master's and a PhD? And I think not having, not being financially secure and having having a decent bit of capital behind me, I found that was a bit of a tough decision, because it was kind of like I can't really devote that time to going back into education. So that navigating that sort of balance, because I always wanted to do both, kind of wanted to do everything really. So that was tough. What about you? What was tough for you?
Probably just the initial going out there. I think once you qualify, it's almost like you have all the skills that you require in order to do the job as a sports therapist, but actually knowing how to really apply that in the context of, as you say, working in the football club and knowing how to manage those sort of interpersonal skills, or how to make, you're now the lead person, you're no longer the observer or the support act for somebody else, as you may be as a student, and you're getting that experience. So actually being out there and being the person who people go to in order to make decisions and make quite big decisions for them, which could theoretically change someone's sort of career pathway, could change someone's outlook on life in terms of what we do with them. So that was probably the biggest challenge I probably faced within that.
I remember that whole "the buck stops with you" thing is quite a big shock to the system, isn't it? And it's a lot to take in. And I do recall, some mates who didn't continue into sports therapy, and part of the reason was that anxiety and fear. And I think I mentioned sort of being able to call on a few mates who had graduated, and having that network of kind of support made a huge difference. Because if you get out, it's very difficult to get back in, isn't it? Because it does stop with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, and as you say, once you're out that environment, then actually being able to apply your skills, apply your knowledge actually becomes a lot harder, because when you're doing it day in, day out, it almost becomes quite second nature in what you do and how you conduct a subjective and objective assessment. But as soon as you step away from that, sometimes it can be difficult just to get that restarted again. Especially like things like anatomy. Even when I went in, predominantly worked in lower limb sports. So trying to keep that anatomy knowledge up to date from the upper limb was a difficult challenge.
Absolutely, yeah. I still think now when I get, I don't see that many hand and wrist patients. So when they come in, it is really a case of, okay, I remember this feeling. I've really got to consciously and proactively start clinically reasoning, rather than that sort of pattern recognition that you get with perhaps more of the lower limb stuff if you've been involved like we have in football and stuff like that. But I do think one of the other things I really remember, actually, now you mention it, particularly in the first few years, was working with experienced practitioners. So even though, a graduate sports therapist, I've got all the skills and competencies, like you say, that experience, it does make a difference. So I've always been one for maintaining that observation and that critical questioning of others, and trying to take everything that's, that they've done well, and then looking at things, maybe what could I do differently or better that would be better for me in my context. And I think that's been a large part of my success. It's standing on the shoulders of others, really.
Yeah, definitely. If you can surround yourself, as you say, with a network and with people who you can sort of chat to. I know when I first sort of went into the football environment, I had a lot of therapists who I could work with and ask questions about. If I wasn't sure about something, I could go to them and say, "Oh, what do you think of this? How could it change my assessment?" Which is obviously was important, particularly for me at that time, coming out of university. So that sort of leads us into my next question, which is, what's the best part about being a sports therapist for you?
Wow, there are so many to mention, Christian, and that sounds nice, doesn't it? After 20 years, I think I still get a huge buzz out of helping an athlete return to their sport and do well. I just think that fundamentally is the reason I got into it, and it still gives me a buzz every single time. And of course, that it's different people, isn't it? So as much as I'm an introvert at heart, I think meeting new people all the time and helping different people just gives you a lot of interesting variance to your career. I've always loved the kind of independence of it. You know, it's in your brain and it's in your hands, and you can go wherever you want, you know, over the globe to practice. And I think that sense of opportunity that being a graduate sports therapist gives you is just it's a good mindset to have. You know, it makes me feel a bit liberated to know that I can do that. I can make that choice. Obviously, I've got 2 kids now, so it's not that easy to just go around the world and do different things, but you never know in the future. So I think the variety and the independence, absolutely. And what I love at my stage of my career at the moment, and you might have some similar kind of thoughts here, is the kind of overlap between teaching and treating patients, sort of that therapeutic alliance with patients and that educational alliance with students, all based around sports therapy and sports med and MSK. I just think there's a lot of overlapping attributes that kind of help each other out. I don't know if you feel the same way, but
yeah, I think that there's something so collaborative about working as a sports therapist, because you're obviously always treating somebody, and you sort of mentioned the educational side of things, which is working collaboratively with students in order to try and generate that next graduate sports therapist. And so everything seems to be in collaboration with other people to try and achieve the best outcomes, which I think is probably what everyone sort of strives to achieve in whatever they do, really. So yeah, and just in terms of what you're saying there, just seeing athletes get back out in order to compete down in Olympics or World Championships. I'm just seeing on TV recently, and there's people who I worked with when they were under 9s, under 10s, who are now the most famous footballers pretty much on the planet at the moment. You're just like, wow, like that is just unbelievable that I've helped them on their journey to where they're going to be.
Absolutely. I remember, I think I spent a couple of years working with British Swimming and Team GB, and I remember I think it was the Swimming World Cup. We were in Tokyo and Singapore, and it was Adam Peaty's first major international event. And obviously he's just a young lad, you know, still a kid. And so seeing him now doing everything he's doing, just makes you feel really, really good. I have to say as well, actually, and I don't know if you agree with this, but that's what that feeling got me into sports therapy. But there's been quite a few patients where, you know, someone will come in and they'll say, "Oh, can you see my uncle, my granddad, my sister," who aren't, you know, they don't participate really in sports. You wouldn't call them athletes in this sort of parlance. But seeing them being able to manage, if it's a chronic pain condition or persistent pain, seeing them able to manage that and live better, or get back to doing things that they didn't think they'd be able to do physically, that's also been a massive kick for me in the last couple of years as well. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, definitely. I think I can look at it from a different point of view as well. That I think when I graduated, I always wanted to be in football, and it was all about football. It was quite narrow-minded. Everything I wanted to do was football-based. And then suddenly, when I came out of university and started working with athletes from all different sports, from slalom canoeists to rhythmic gymnasts to British jiu-jitsu fighters, and suddenly you get opened up to that wider scope of athlete potentially, and you're talking about obviously a wider scope of population in terms of helping people with musculoskeletal conditions. But again, the same sort of applied to me in that context where I was very one sport focused, and it became multi-sport pretty quickly. And actually I enjoyed working with all those because they all provide a different challenge, and probably the same with the patients that you've seen, that it's a different challenge to try and return them back to either activities of daily living or some form of activity, physical activity that they enjoy doing. So
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I was similar when I first went into it. It's like football, that's the only thing I want to do. Football, absolutely passionate, mad about it. But then you suddenly see these other opportunities and you have a go and you think, actually, no, it's not. That was great to be narrow, but actually there's lots more I can engage in, and I'm not a great swimmer. I had to do a lot of kind of observation and sort of learning on the job, as it were, when I first started working with British Swimming. And thanks to the likes of Carl Butler for that sort of stuff. But again, what a great experience. Probably the best experiences I've had were in swimming in that sort of relatively short 4 or 5 year period. And would never have known that I was going to enjoy it that much at the start of my career,
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing that you mentioned, Michael, was your research element. So obviously you're quite well known for your work around equity, diversity, inclusion. Can you tell us a little bit about that and sort of where that's taken you?
Yeah, sure. So I think first thing to say is that part of being a graduate sports therapist and teaching sports therapy is that I'm constantly researching it. Obviously from like a secondary research perspective, but keeping up to date for your patients and what you teach, I'm doing it every single day. And a couple of years into my roles in higher education, I started to get interested in pursuing some research, but it wasn't directly in that sort of sports therapy area, because I was doing that every day, and I still do. So I thought I want to do something a bit different. And I'd had, prior to working at the University of East London, I was lecturing in adult education and FE, and I was lecturing in Redbridge, borough of Redbridge, sort of East London, Essex, really diverse student cohorts in terms of ethnicity. And I started to notice a few things about education in that environment that didn't seem fair to me. So I started kind of researching for my my postgrad diploma, which was at Loughborough in sports pedagogy. So kind of the science and art of teaching. I started looking at inclusivity, and that led me down a path to the PhD that I'm on researching now, which is looking at equity in healthcare, basically racial equity. So why are there differences in healthcare outcomes for example, Black versus white patients? Why are there differences in outcomes in higher education? So the difference between good degrees between Black students and white students. And so it's led me to write a couple of book chapters and sort of go up and down the country, sort of offering support and advice to different organizations, from kind of universities to kind of more corporate areas, looking at how we can try and change some of these healthcare inequities. So that work is still ongoing now. I'm a couple of years into the PhD, and I've probably got a couple of years left to go. And yeah, it was just really looking at sports therapy, doing it every day, but I can see that some patients present with obstacles from society that some patients don't have. And when I look at education, some students or the environment provides obstacles that shouldn't be there, and it's looking at how we can try and change that. And then obviously coming onto the board of directors, it's one area where I feel like I can give a little bit of support and guidance to the organisation as a whole, in terms of essentially just being a bit more progressive and developing in terms of trying to improve things like, for example, diversity in the industry, that type of stuff.
Yeah, great. And sort of in terms of the focus for the society then, is there anything that sort of you've implemented or you've looked at to move the society forward with that regard?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's sort of an informal thing which is trying to encourage conversations, difficult conversations amongst the directors, and kind of trying to generate a culture where we do talk about inequalities and how we're going to change them in a really supportive way. And I hope I've done that. In a more formal capacity, I'm really proud of the work that we've done together, yourself and I and the board as a collective, on implementing, I think, an incredibly innovative scheme. So for the next 2 years, we've diverted some resources towards providing national mentorship, particularly for our recently graduated members who occupy protected characteristics or have marginalized characteristics. So, for example, care leavers, caregivers, English as second language, refugees, asylum seekers, minority ethnicity, female, disability, because we know that generally across the MSK landscape, it's not as diverse as it should be. So it's not just a society of sports therapists, it's generally speaking. And we can try and change that, particularly in areas of kind of leadership. It's heavily male orientated, heavily white male, able-bodied orientated. So this strategy is basically, can we get some very quick changes in diversity before opening it out to the wider membership so that everybody can benefit from it? And I'm really proud that we've got that in place. So if anybody's listening and wants more information, please do visit the Society of Sports Therapists website to look at the Brian Boynton mentorship scheme.
Yeah, great. And sort of tagged onto that as well, and I'll tie it all into one, is that we obviously established the needs group as well, which is look at sort of the EDI aspects of the society and how we can continue to improve, obviously, with sort of guidance from yourself and a couple of the directors there. So that's another sort of thing which ties into exactly what you're saying. With
Absolutely.
Sure that we're supporting members.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the needs group is such a great step forward for us. It's the first time it's ever happened, and what a great bunch of practitioners that lead up that needs group. And as you say, they're there for the membership. They're also there for the employees and any stakeholders involved with the society. In fact, and it's really making some good progress in terms of diversity. So, yeah, really proud of that.
So that sort of leads me on to our last question then, which is, what are your aspirations for the future? Where do you see yourself going?
I think I'd love to stay with the board for a couple of years. I think board of directors at the society, just long enough to really kind of lay down these new foundations for, particularly for EDI and for our kind of competencies review and our academic frameworks. And then hand that over and step down and see it go from strength to strength and maintain my membership for as long as I can practice, really. I think outside of the society, achieving a PhD is probably the big one. But other than that, really, I just enjoy what I'm doing. I would happily keep doing what I'm doing, seeing patients, teaching students, and bringing up my 2 kids. Yeah, I think there's no other great mountains that I want to climb. I'm pretty satisfied, to be honest. So just enjoying stuff, and hopefully some of my work in sort of solidarity with other scholar activists, hopefully some of the work can actually create some change for equity, certainly in higher education in the UK. That'd be good.
Michael, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for having a good chat about everything sports therapy and sharing your story and how you got to where you are now and sort of your aspirations for the future. So hopefully we'll catch up with you again soon.
My pleasure, and thanks so much, Christian. See you soon.